bit late here. We're trying to hustle through several things we got to get done here today with the child dedication service, and so we want to get right to it. Ecclesiastes 6, and again, if I was going to say a title of this chapter, just chasing the wind, following illusions of life, and just trying to give you each verse something that he's saying. He starts out number 1. Of course, we're past this one here, but verse number 1, there's I've seen in life that's not good. It's a bad thing. That's common. That's a sad thing. It's like we don't learn. Again, what's the old saying? The only thing we learn from history, it's right now. What they're doing right now to our country, we see over there in China. What Mao did, he allowed the women to be kind of in control. And so even on his great march, the majority of that was women. And they kind of took control. And then the other ones he gave control to was kids, children. I said, there's pictures you can see of a 10, 12-year-old boy. They've got rifles, and they're by the leader of a town. They got a dunce cap on him, and they're screaming at him before they shoot him. And I said, what kind of a kid? What kid? If you took an average kid today, give him a gun, and tell him you can have any house that you want in Durango if you won't be harmed. If you'll kill the man who owns the house, you can have his house. Well, a lot of kids don't got enough brains to think that through, and that's exactly what we've got in our country today. And again, I'm not against you ladies. I've always said the reason there's kind of the women's movement is because men are lazy and cowardly and won't step up to the plate. That's what it was with the book of Esther, Vashti. The men, you had men doing wicked, and so the women had to step up. Vashti said, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, it wasn't because she was a rebel, as her husband was wicked. And so thank God for godly ladies. And I'm not against ladies who have godly principles, making some good decisions, but that's not God's plan. And then you see all what's going on in our school. What Mao did is he wiped out a culture. They totally, after about 3,000 years of history, he annihilated their history. And everybody had to dress alike. Somebody said, well, what did they dress alike? They had to dress identical. They all wore pants. They all kind of wore a tunic. So everybody supposedly is equal. They're all dressing the same. Parrots had to die because they had too much color. Books all had to be burned. Anybody with glasses, they killed them. They shot them. Because they figured if you had glasses, you were a teacher or you were educated. And so they killed all the smart people. They killed all the people. And Pol Pot did the same thing. And Stalin did the same thing. They killed all the people with wisdom. And again, Pol Pot was a farmer. And he slaughtered 3 million people. He didn't even know what he was doing. He went into one city and he said, like 3 million people, he said, get out. Can you imagine going to Denver and saying, you got one day, everybody out? Well, where are they going to go? That's why you had the killing fields. I remember hearing a girl at a preaching conference. She'd had to hide among the dead bodies. Just piles of dead people. 3 million people out. Kicked them out in the jungle. What are you going to eat in the jungle? 3 million people. I mean, not even thinking. But he used children, and we've got that here. So he's talking about, he said, man, what do they say? We never learn from history. That's number 1. And then if you look at verse number 2, I said the illusion of possessions. What I mean by that is there's a difference between having things and keeping things. And he basically says in verse number 2, a man to whom God gives riches and wealth and honor, he lacks nothing, yet God gives him not power to eat there, but a stranger, he said, that's evil. So he said, you can have a long life, you can have all kinds of possessions, but you're not going to hang on to it, what he says. He said, I don't care how hard you work for it, how hard you labored for it, how many hours. He said, you're not going to hang on to it. Sooner or later, somebody else is going to get it. And so why chase that wind? Why chase that illusion is what he's saying. Then verse 3, if a man beget 100 children. And again, Solomon might have been thinking about himself. He has 100 kids and lives many years. Said his soul be filled with good. I mean, who wouldn't want that? You got a big family, a huge family. You got a long life, he says, and you have everything your heart could desire. But if you die and you live in such a way that nobody cares, what a waste that is. That's an evil. And I said the illusion of an unloved life. And it's sad to me because I think Solomon, I don't think he had. I tried to show you that the antediluvian age before the flood, You remember there was a guy named Lamech, and he had 2 wives. He had 3 children, Jubal and Jabal and Tubal Cain. And then just throws this out. Naamah, who is a sister of Tubal Cain. And people scratched their head over that and said, why did God mention her? And so the Jews, they have one. They got the sons of God in Genesis 6. I don't know, but that name means beautiful. So Solomon married this woman named Naamah, a beautiful woman named Maacah. She was a wicked woman and even married her own son. Just went downhill. And he said, if you live a long life, Solomon, and you have all your heart's desire, but when you're dead, nobody cares, what good is it? And boy, I want to live a life that when I'm gone, at least leave something behind and not some edifice. I'd rather leave it in peace. 3 is, I'm going to read verse 3 again. So the days of his years be many, and his soul be not filled with good, and also to have no burial. I say, and here's his next thought, that an untimely birth, a miscarriage, is better than he. So you kind of got to get that when you read your Bible. Sometimes you got to read it in context to get what he's going to say. What he's talking about is having a miscarriage. And that's a terrible thing. Like I say, some of you ladies know what that is. And he said that's a horrible thing to deal with. What's more horrible, he said an untimely birth, a miscarriage, is better. Is better than somebody who wastes their life. He just said a wasted birth, that's bad. But because you look at that, and I do, I think, and that child will never live. They'll never have a chance to laugh and to run. I see kids that have health issues, even in our own family. And I see people who maybe died when they're young. I think and that breaks my heart. I think they'll probably never be able to run. Maybe if the kids got problems, crippled, they'll never be able to play, laugh, maybe never fall in love, never maybe get married, never know what it is to have children. That's sad. And he said, what's worse, he cometh in vanity. And you got a miscarried life that's never had a chance to see daylight. He said that guy, if you live and you don't accomplish anything, if you don't do something for God and live and smoke, if you're not living for the Lord, you're wasting your eternity. And he says that's worse than a miscarried baby. That's worse than that. A baby who's never had a chance to live. He said, what you're doing is worse than that. He said, because when you're done, it's like you never even lived. He said, your name's covered with darkness. Verse number 6, moreover, he had not seen the sun nor known anything. He has more rest that never lived than somebody who's lived their life and didn't do anything for God. I think I told this to somebody the other day. Where I grew up on a ranch there in Nebraska, and one of the places we call the 440, and it was way north of our house, our ranch, and very hilly area. There's old wagon tracks you see from ancient days, from some ancient road. It's just a cow pasture now, but out in the middle of that cow pasture, I remember a kid riding a horse and following those wagon tracks, and that was an old road. There's a buffalo waller up there still. The buffaloes had crushed the ground down so much that they made kind of a small little indentation, and it's still there to this day. But on the side of that was a hole in the ground. And we always thought, well, we heard I remember my dad saying somebody used to live up here, and so we thought, well, that must have been a dugout. That must have been, they'd go into a side of a bank, and they'd take out, probably the size of this room here, but they'd cut it out in blocks, and then they'd bring those blocks of sod out and lay them out here, doubling the size of your house. I thought, well, that must have been an old dugout. Well, my brother, he told me about a month ago, they were looking at an old paper, and they mentioned a sod house that was in about 18 miles, they said, south of Mason City. My sister-in-law likes researching that. She thought, that's about where that spot is. And she found a picture, and it's about 99% sure There's an old sod house. They had a little sod shed. He's got a buckboard and horses. And he got his man and his wife, and they're sitting there, and they got 7 kids. They got 6 tow-headed boys and a little girl they're holding. And I look at that, and he said, well, what do you mean by all that? Now it's just a hole in the ground. I thought, a lot of times my wife and I, we drive down the road, and especially there in the Midwest, you see all these empty farmhouses. A lot of times they've been abandoned. Sometimes out here you see the old log cabins. And I always think about that. I think that house used to be some woman's dream. Some woman had that farmhouse, and her husband built that, and they're going to make a life, and they're going to make a living, and now it's just an empty shambles, just falling littered to pieces. It's as if they didn't even live there. And I thought, here's that family. I don't know who they are, and now it's as if they didn't even live. Just a hole, literally a hole in the ground where the shed was. And I think about those things, and that's what he's talking about. He's saying, look, if you live in such a way, you're not living for God, you're not accomplishing anything. And he said your life will just be covered over with darkness, your name will be forgotten, your life will just be like a hole in the ground. It'd be as if you never even lived. Now, to me, that's a tragedy. And that's what he's struggling with. And this guy should be struggling because this guy is wealthy. He's got more wealth than a human's ever had. But without God, he's accomplished nothing. All he did was he shows his whole life on what not to do. Don't do what I did with my life. I wasted my life. And I said that's probably the saddest words I've ever heard. When I've stood by the bedside of a lot of people when they're dying. And the sickest, saddest thing to me is when a man looks at me and said, I wasted my life. And I think, poor buddy, I feel bad for you, but I can't change it and you can't either. It's too late. And our country right now, our country's trying to live without God. Maybe you saw this here. That was kind of hilarious. Our president today, of course, is we call it Easter, but you probably saw also Transgender Day of Visibility. Now, what a foolish thing. Instead of celebrating the Lord's resurrection, we're celebrating men wearing 5 pounds of makeup with a goofy purple wig, and they're dressed in improper attire and gyrating around a 3rd grader. And here's what it is today. We honor today the extraordinary courage. I'm saying, well, what's the extraordinary courage of a transgender? To make a fool of himself? We honor the extraordinary courage and contributions of transgender Americans. What do they have contributed to America? I'm just saying, you kids, again, say, well, we know this. If you don't tell people, they don't know it. If I'm not right, why are we celebrating that today? Our president, you can't celebrate, you can't mention Christ today at the White House, but you can mention items of fertility like rabbits and eggs and pagan things, but you can't mention Jesus today. No crosses, nothing to do with church today. We'd rather celebrate paganism, transgender. We honor the extraordinary courage and contributions of transgender Americans and reaffirm our nation's commitment to forming a more perfect union where all people are created equal and treated equally throughout their lives. I told my wife, yeah, that's what George Washington meant. That's why George Washington, they gave their wealth and put their lives on the line so a guy could gyrate around in front of 3rd graders in improper attire. That's what they meant. That's what Thomas Jefferson meant. I bet you they're happy that today we're celebrating transgender and all their benefit, how they've helped this country so much. That's what Thomas Jefferson meant. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Life among them, the life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the opportunity to gyrate around in front of 3rd graders. I'm sure that's what they meant. I'm just saying, when you don't do things for God, it gets insane. And that's what he's dealing with. He's saying, look, without God, if you don't live for God, your life is absolutely worthless. I want to read something here. And this is a quote from John Adams. And you've heard the last part, but I looked it up. I thought, man, it's a paragraph, so don't lose me. Those men were so smart. Of course, being over there in communist China and seeing different things. And our country has got so far away from God morally, it's in some ways it's better over there in communism. You say, oh, I don't think so. You're ignorant. Our country has got so far away. I've never seen such clean city. 11 million people, absolutely spotless. I said in that whole country, I said, well, maybe they're eating them. I've never seen such fancy cars in my life. Alfred. I said, you got a Rolls Royce, you got a Benz, you got a BMW, and Alfred. Yeah, that's a pretty cool name. Alfred. Buy you an Alfred. I'm telling you, they're fancy. In fact, in the city, if your cars, we can't even pay the interest, let alone cancel the debt. That's a whole other thing. I'm just saying, without God, we've got so far away from God, it is a democracy. And here's what I want you to listen to this and think this through. Don't lose me on this. I read this to Nick. I said, we are so ignorant, we have to read this slow. The only thing saving our bacon, humanly speaking, I know it's God, I know it's the truths of the Bible, but humanly speaking, when it comes to our laws, the only thing saving our bacon is there's still the thumb on the liberals called the Constitution. It's kind of, they're going every way they can to skirt it, to get around that. But I cannot believe our forefathers were so smart. They saw what would happen when a country became wicked and had no morals. Here's what John Adams said, and this is a quote. John Adams, it was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, one of the framers of the Constitution, the second president of the United States. Now listen to this. He said, while our country remains untainted, again, what they were doing really was a great experiment. There's never been a time in history where you had a middle class like we do. You had kings, and you had basically slaves or serfs. And our country come along, and instead of having 90% here, 90% we call middle class, and vote. So, oh boy, you shouldn't have said that. Well, if a woman's following her husband, shouldn't she be voting what her husband wants anyway? Another thing is, if you didn't own land, you didn't vote. Oh, that's terrible. Well, they figured back then, if you didn't own land, you were lazy good for nothing. And if you were lazy good for taxes, and if you didn't own land, they figured you were lazy. You needed to have a business or own land, then you had a right. I see that in churches. Sometimes people don't even give to a church and yet come to a meeting and tell how they think the mission money ought to be spent. You have no business doing that. If you're not putting the time in, putting the dime in, you keep quiet. Well, that's what our forefathers saw that. Here's what he said. While our country remains untainted with the principles and manners, which are now producing desolation in so many parts of the world. Do you understand what he just said there? He said this idea of America, other countries are trying it. You know, during our revolution or our war of independence, France had the same thing. In fact, Lafayette and others that helped us went over there. Benjamin Franklin was a friend and did some things maybe he shouldn't have done, but they went over to help the French Revolution. Absolute chaos. That's what he's saying. He said they're trying to do what we're doing, but it's disaster. Our Constitution, we've had one Constitution in 200 years. I'm trying to find, I can't remember, but France has had like 200 constitutions. We've had like one. And he said, what they're trying to do, what we're doing, he said, is a desolation in so many parts of the world, while she continues sincere and incapable of insidious or treacherous and impious, which is immoral policy. We shall have the strongest reason to rejoice in the local destination assigned to us by providence. And I wish they wouldn't have been gutless there. Instead of saying God, they were trying to appease our claiming justice and moderation when we're living in wicked. We have wicked people and doing wicked things, and displays in the most captivating manner the charm of candor, frankness, and sincerity, while it is nation in the world. He said you cannot function in a democracy if there's wickedness. He said it'll lead to absolutely be the most wicked and miserable country in the world, because we have no government. There is no moral compass. And so they'll do everything they can. There is no right or wrong. And if I want to be a homosexual, that's my right. If I want to be a transsexual and you have to hire me, that's my right. There's no place you can go in the world where there's a place where there's right or wrong. The only place you find that in God's word. See, science can tell a Miss Tilly, Aunt Tilly, that what she does, if she smokes cigarettes, science can tell her what's going to happen to her lungs. Science can tell you that. But only God's word can tell you whether that's right or wrong. And if there is no moral, if there is no place that says this is right and this is wrong, then there is no right, wrong. They saw that. That's what he's saying. He said, if you get to the place where there's no right or wrong, there's no morals, there's no, the world will look and they'll see design. They'll see design in a tree. I've told you, they'll see design in your eye or design in their ear, which means there's a God. And so then they have to look at nonsense and say, well, there's order and chaos. There's order in an explosion. There is not. So we're to the foolishness now. There's no right or wrong, no up or down, no good or bad. It's chaos. Let me finish here. He says, government. He's saying that can put on morals. No government. What are you going to do? Beat them? You can't change people's morals. Government, there's no government. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Here's the quote. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to govern government of any other. He said, when you drop morals, and we are seeing alcoholism. You can't believe it gets to where I feel, it seems to me, this is what seems right to me. I want to do this. And then when they come up with things like hate crimes, and I told you that you need to go to jail, you need to go to re-education centers. And there are people in our government that teach such a thing. They literally teach such a thing. I used to joke on this. I used to joke. I mean, now we're at a place disbanding police. How can you be so stupid? Making all drugs, not the government. That's a people saying there is no right or wrong. I used to say, joking, well, I know how to get rid of, we legalize drugs and legalize homosexual marriage. I know how to get rid of crime. Let's legalize murder. We can empty the prisons. I used to say that thinking, how stupid can you be? But about a month ago, one of our senators said such a statement. Literally, a Democratic senator made that very crime. He said that crime could be eliminated immediately by simply renaming the offenses that he felt were slanted against blacks. If we just rename it, that'll solve our problems and we can empty our prisons out. You talk about chasing an illusion. That's what Solomon's talking about. You talk about chasing the wind, something foolish. Then look at verse number 6 real quick. He said, yea, though he live 1,000 years, twice told. That means 2,000 years. Though he live 1,000 years, twice told, yet hath he seen no good, do not all go to the one place. Again, he's talking about a person that lives their life, but they live it without God, they live it without morals, they live it just for pleasure. And he said, hey, you're gonna die like everybody else. If you live 2,000 years, what good? He said, what good is that? Who doesn't want to live long? Everybody wants to live long. God talks about that. Nothing wrong with wanting that, but that's just an illusion of a long life, but it's a wasted life. I'm going to look over real quick something I saw the other day, Genesis 5. Would you turn there real quick? We'll come back here, but turn to Genesis 5 very quickly. Genesis 5, and then I'm going to kind of wrap this up here. Genesis 5. I used to say, and been here a lot of years and preached a lot and even come to a lot of different conclusions in my life. And if you remember, years ago, I used to say, man, wouldn't it be wonderful to live 900 years? I used to think that. And I know what I'd do if I did. I'd waste most of it. I know I would. And you probably would too. Because you know what you'd think? I'd think, well, man, I got 900 years. I think I'll be a sailor for 100 years. I think I'll just work on musical instruments for 100 years. I'd probably travel around the world for 100 years. And I said, how wonderful it would be. And then a few years ago, probably because I'm getting older, I think I'm 64, 65, I don't know which it is. I've lost track. I'm 37 in my mind, 37. But it started dawning on me how horrible it'd be to live 900 years if it was a wicked life or a wasted life. It'd be an Adam and Eve. I'm surprised they didn't commit suicide, because as they looked across the world and just got more and more wicked, and where every thought of man's heart was evil continually, and they're seeing the whole world is becoming so wicked, God said, I have to wipe them completely out. That'd be depressing if I was the mom and dad of that, Adam and Eve. But I'd even be depressed about it if I was a Christian, wouldn't you? And you just see the whole world's going to the devil. And I read this verse. I thought, you know what? I might be right on that. Look at Genesis chapter 5. It says, back up here, it says in verse 24, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And I'm glad for that, but he had zero effect on the world, because he lived his life. It was wicked as ever. And Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech. Methuselah lived after he begat Lamech 782 years and begat sons and daughters. All the days of Methuselah were 969. You know, that's pretty close to 1,000. That's the longest anybody physically lived, and he died. But here we go. Look at verse number 28 and 29. And Lamech, his son, lived 182 years and begat a son, and he called his name Noah, saying, this same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. And I never really caught that last phrase. He named his son Noah and said, well, at least we got some hope here. And I got to thinking, it was getting so bad in Lamech's time, he was seeing all the wickedness. So, well, man, he lived there in verse number 30, 590 years. He said, my life is wicked, and there's work and toil, because this world is cursed. I think it was a tough thing to live all those years, especially if you're trying to serve God. He said, I'm going to name my boy Comfort. Now, he may not have realized the comfort's going to be God's going to kill everybody and start over with him. But he knew this boy right here is going to somehow. I want to just kind of wrap this up here. I want to kind of tell you, Solomon, it's sad that he didn't listen to his own advice. I want to just say something. This, Solomon, and I never thought of this till studying this out. I never thought of that till and spend any money helping any poor, building anything, trying to help anybody, trying to lift anybody else up. I don't read of one single incident. You know what you read? All he did was spend his money on himself. That's all you ever read. Look over very quickly. We'll wrap this up. Look at 1 Kings. I want to look just a few verses on this. Your house will maybe disintegrate to a hole in the ground. Your history, your life will be covered by darkness. Your name will be forgotten. You say, well, I don't know that I believe that. Can you name your great-great-grandfather? Most of us can't even name our great-great-grandfather and mother. You know why? Because you forgot them. It's as if they never even lived. You might be able to go and even live, unless, like my great-great-grandfather Orlando Lukes, got his Bible. I love it. Got that Bible where he tells about the day he got saved. He said, I got the religion of Jesus Christ. I got it. Praise God, I got it. He has it in the front of his Bible. I never even met the man. I don't know the man, but I owe the man, because he raised my grandma. And I'm thankful for it. She was a godly lady. She raised my dad. My dad raised me. They did something that lasted. I remember Orlando Lukes. I remember because he got saved and he raised his kids in the faith of Christ. Look at 1 Kings chapter 10. 1 Kings 10. Solomon, he entertained dignitaries. Think about it. Verse number 1, and the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord. She came to prove him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great train. I'm not going to have time to finish this, so I'm going to jump right through some of this. We'll pick it up here maybe the next week. This woman came because she'd heard about this great man, and she went up to seek what made him so great, Queen of Sheba. But she's not the only one. Look at chapter 10, verse number 12. And the king, First Kings chapter 10, verse number 11. And the navy also Hiram brought gold from Ophir, and got Ophir a great plenty of algum trees. And the king made algum trees pillars for the house of the Lord, the king's house, harps and psalteries and singers. And Solomon gave unto the queen of Sheba all her desire. And verse number 14, the weight of gold that came to Solomon one year was 666 talents of gold, and says he had targets, verse 16, of beaten gold, and he had verse 18, he had an ivory throne overlaid with gold. The man was loaded. He had everything a human could want, but you never read that he helped anybody. Not one single time. That blew my mind. For him, they say, I read this, for him, the retinue, for him to have his reign, probably had to take care of about 40,000 to 50,000 people. Think about that. You got to feed them. You got to see the military. You got to house them. You got to equip them. You got government men. You've got singers. You've got the military leaders, education leaders. You got all these religious leaders. He's responsible to feed 40 to 50,000. And so what did he do? He spent it all on himself. And the Queen of Sheba went back. Now she got saved, but it wasn't because of what Solomon said. It was in spite. I think I'll just show you that and be done. Look what it says in chapter 10, chapter 10, it says, verse number 3. And Solomon told her all her questions. There was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. Man, I'd love to get around a guy like that and just ask. I'm not kidding you. I'd ask him questions about the stars and trees and everything I could think of. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen, listen to this, number 1, all of Solomon's wisdom. 2, and the house that he'd built, his palace, which they've just been uncovering in Jerusalem. 3, the meat at his table, the sitting of his servants, the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel and cupbearers. She comes, she's so impressed. She sees all this great temple worship. She sees all this great king and all of his retinue here. But look, verse number 4, and here's the 4th one, his ascent, by which he went up to the house. That, it says there was no more spirit in her. That literally means took her breath away. We'd say took the wind out of her sails. She comes along and she thinks she's going to really prove this guy, and she sees all this glory that impressed her. What finally took the wind out of her sails was she saw that guy go to the house of God. Now, sad to me, because she kind of had it backwards. Verse 7, howbeit I believe not the words until I came and mine eyes had seen it. Behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. He was trying to impress her with all of his wealth and wisdom. And she went away thinking, man, this is fantastic. But what she needed to see was God. And it says there, when she says in verse number 8, happy are thy men, and happy are thy servants, which stand continually before thee and hear thy wisdom. Blessed be the Lord God who still lieth thee. She got it backwards. She said, God is so lucky to have you. He should have said, oh no, that's not right. I am lucky to know God. She went back like a Pentecostal thinking, name it, claim it, blab it, and grab it. Now, I think she thought things through, because Jesus said someday she's going to stand in judgment against the Jews that rejected the Lord. And Jesus said someday you'll meet that Queen of Sheba. But it wasn't because of Solomon. All he did was just brag about his wisdom and brag about his wealth. And if it wouldn't have been for God, that woman would have went home and died and gone to hell. Solomon, no, his servants weren't happy. No, Solomon wasn't happy. With the golden, can you imagine, why would you take a ivory throne and overlay it with gold? You could have made it out of chicken wire and overlaid it with gold if you would have wanted to. All he did was focus on himself. And I'll say it one more time, I never see he helped any other person with all that wealth. What a wasted life. No matter how much money you have today, if you're not living for the Lord, it is a wasted life. You're wasting your eternity. You're just spinning your wheels one more day. You're no different than people in the nursing home. One more day to your grave, one more day to your funeral, clicking off one more day. I mean, I think about it. I come into church today, and I was praying with my wife as we're driving down the road, and I had my eyes open. Don't get scared. I was praying all the way coming in, and I was saying, God, thank you for another spring, another summer. I've had 64 summers. I've had 64 birthdays. I've had 64 Christmases. Probably don't have a whole lot more. And neither do you. You and I better be serving the Lord. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for all the wonderful things you've given us in this life. But this is not what we should be pursuing. It's the illusion. It's the chasing the wind, he said. Like chasing the wind. And yet men just, it's so common. We keep pursuing money and got to get this. I got to have that car and got to get this bill paid. He even goes